Good evening. First of all, I'm honored. And second, I'm pleased to be here. Thanks to the Keeper's family and all the organizers who worked hard to push this project of bringing me here. And I'm happy to discuss the topic with you tonight concerning the ancient Jewish town of Yodfat in Galilee. What you see here in front of you is a page from a 16th century book of Josephus Flavius, The Jewish War. There are many scholars in the world, historians, who look at Josephus sometimes as a storyteller. And if you pay attention, you'll see that down here there's a unicorn. Okay, in some cases, historians put Josephus in a place of legends, like the unicorn. I will try to prove the other way. This is the place of archaeology. Okay, we are all in an archaeological institute, one of the greatest of the world, and I will try to use the archaeological discoveries at Yodfat to show you the history of the Jews in the Galilee and the war in the Galilee, the Jewish war, to remind you that Jotapata, Yodfat, is the first war, the first battle between the Jews and the Romans in the Great Revolt. Most of you, I believe, know very well what was the last one, which is Masada. But very few know that the first one was fought in the Galilee, and this is Yodfat. So to remind you, Galilee is the northern part of the land of Israel, today the state of Israel, and Yodfat is located almost in the center of what we call the Lower Galilee. Oops, sorry, that's beginning. Upper Galilee is here, Lower Galilee is here, and the Yodfat is right where the star is. This is how the site looks like. No other speakers, okay, I have to stand here as I was saying. This is how Yodfat looks from the air. This is the site. This is the hill. You can see it is surrounded by steep wadis, ravines around it, only accessible from its northern side. We excavated here, as was mentioned, for 7 seasons from 92 until 2000. And since then, we were working on the process and starting to write the final report. I'll start with just a few slides concerning the issue, which is a very important issue, of who were the Galileans. This issue is under discussion for many years, and all scholars who are interested in understanding who were the Jews in the Galilee for the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud later on, or who were the Jews at the time of Jesus in Galilee, Jesus and his followers in Galilee, they all ask questions: how did the Jews arrive here suddenly? Because at the end of the first temple period, after the Assyrian attack and conquest of the Galilee, most of the Jews were sent to exile, and the number of Israelites who stayed there was very small. But we do have archaeological evidence that can tell you who were the people in the Galilee, most of the people in the Galilee during this time. And here are some 3 inscriptions that tell us who are the people. Up here is a Greek inscription dedicated to Hadad and Atargatis. So it's in Greek language, but the god and goddess are of local origin. Aramean, Canaanite gods and goddesses. And the second one over here is in Greek as well, but is dedicated to Zeus. So we can understand that in the what we call the Hellenistic period, late 4th, 3rd, 2nd century BCE, people in Galilee, in most parts of the Galilee, were not Jews, as Israelites were deported, and the area was taken by other settlers who were not Israelites, not Jews. This is the fourth inscription from Upper Galilee, which is in Phoenician, and mentioned the Phoenician god of Baal Hamon. And we do understand that, especially in Upper Galilee, the local people were of some kind of a Phoenician connection. They're not necessarily Phoenicians. There were people that had a very strong relationship with the Phoenician on the coastal area. But again, not Israelites, not Jews. Another find from the Galilee is this rock relief, the only one known in Israel, which also resembles a god from the classical period. And the most important discovery is the temple on the top of a high mountain in the border between Upper and Lower Galilee, called Mitzpeh Hayamim. And in this corner there is a small temple. Its plan, its design is of a Canaanite style, not a classical style. Didn't come from Greece. Okay, that's a very typical local type of a temple. And inside, this group of figurines were found. And especially what's important is this situla, this small bronze vessel carrying, they're all Egyptian gods, by the way. And here is a parade of Egyptian gods, and up here is a Phoenician inscription. So we have Egyptian god, Phoenician language, but the name of the goddess is Astarte. So it's a Canaanite goddess. These are the people of Galilee during the 3rd, 2nd century BC. Local people, pagans who are connected to Phoenicia, but carrying with them a lot of local Canaanite Phoenician traditions. Through the excavations at Yodfat, we discovered the first layer, the earliest layer of habitat at the site. And according to the finds, which you can see some over here, typical Hellenistic period oil lamps, and especially this one with erotics on both sides, cupids on both sides. That's for sure was not a Jewish style of oil lamps in the 2nd century BCE. The 2nd century BCE, remember, this is already the time of the Second Temple, but the Jews were living in Judea, and only Judea. It's only the beginning of the Hasmonean kingdom when Jewish forces, armies marched, conquered north, south, and east, and created the big monarchy of the Hasmoneans, of the Maccabees, during the end of the 2nd century BC. So we have here a house with pottery. You can see over here, this is a special type that we named GCW, stands for Galilean courseware, which are typical to the non-Jewish stage of Galilee. In this case, the place was conquered and set on fire. There is a layer of ash over here. This is the wall of the same room, while this wall is already later. It's the end of the 2nd century BCE, and we have Hasmonean coins in its foundations. This is a proof for the annexation of the Galilee by the Hasmoneans to the Judean kingdom that is just being born. So Yodfat contributed immediately, not immediately because it's the bottom, so it was after a few seasons. But one of the important contributions of the excavations of Yodfat is substantial evidence for the Judification of the Galilee, conquering it by Jewish forces, settling Jews from Judea, and converting local people to Judaism. I will try to show you now how we learned about the expansion of the town. On the top, this wall that you can see here in our reconstruction, of course based on evidence found in the dig, is from the Hasmonean village. We don't know enough of it, but we have evidence that this is late 2nd century BCE, small fortified site, while the non-Jewish earlier site was not fortified. And it's then from this top hill, it started to expand to the slopes. And in the 1st century CE, the expansion got down into this ledge of the hill. We can identify it by looking at the coin, the distribution of coins at the site. This blue or purple belongs to the Hellenistic coins, and all these 3 areas are located on the top of the hill. Most coins are Hellenistic. Only small amounts are Hasmoneans or even Roman. When we move to the sides, we see that the number of Hasmonean coins is reducing slowly, while the Hasmonean coins are more and more and covers even the entire area. And of course, in the early Roman period, we have more coins, as you can see over here, 32% from the lower part. So here we have, if you count the coins, identify the coins you got from the dig, you can learn how the town developed. Let's switch now to the economy of the town. What and how Jews lived in the Galilee during the Second Temple period. So first of all, it was olive oil industry. We do know from later sources, like the Mishnah, that the Jews sent olive oil to the temple from Galilee. And we have here at Yodefat evidence for at least 2 oil presses. One of them is in a cave. The other one, that's what's left of the installation. But for me as an archaeologist, these are 2 different oil presses from different parts of the town, and maybe there were even more. The oil press in the cave was found right here. And in this area, we uncovered some residential, as a matter of fact, 2 houses. Each house has a mikveh, a ritual bath, a Jewish ritual bath. Nowadays, it is very clear. It was not like this when we started excavating in 1992. There were still discussions among archaeologists. Is finding a mikveh proves that this is a Jewish site? I think today it's agreed that if you have mikvaot, those typical ritual baths, that means that the site is a Jewish site. By the way, mikvaot of this style, meaning a small pool with steps going down, it's all plastered, of course. These types of installations were found only in Jewish areas, in Galilee, Judea, and Transjordan, the Perea, the Jewish side of the Jordan, and that's all. We don't have them in Syria, we don't have them in Lebanon, North Africa, only in Israel, dated 1st to 6th centuries until Jews slowly abandoned the country, and speaking about majority. Mikvaot appeared in Europe, in Jewish settlements, only in the 13th century CE. So we speak here about an evidence which is very important for identifying Jewish sites. And we think that the close proximity of 2 mikvaot here to the oil press means that these were the houses of the olive oil producers. According to the Jewish laws, liquids can get impurity very easily, and therefore if you want to produce olive oil, pure olive oil, you'll be able to send it to the temple or sell it to people who keep high standards of kosher. They probably immersed in the mikveh before going to work, and therefore there is a connection between these houses and the oil press in the cave. Wine production, in the surveys around the site, we discovered 2 wine presses. They were not excavated, so I cannot promise you that they are 1st century, but it's possible. But what was a great surprise for us is the discovery of the industry of wool materials. We have the largest number ever found of loom weights in Israel from the Second Temple period. We excavated 5% of the site, 2.5% from dwellings, and we have 250 loom weights The site is about 15 acres. So try to imagine how many more are there. And this is the loom weights. It's about 15 centimeters, 2 inches, 3 inches. They are tied to the ropes at the bottom of the loom, and then you weave the others into it. And we have also spindle whorls and other weaving tools, and it goes together very well with, sorry, I will continue with it later. We have evidence of grazing sheep, and this of course goes very well with a strong industry of wool materials. Another surprise for us was the industry of pottery vessels, and surprise it was because Yodfat, as you've seen in the photos, is on a high hill. It means that you have to bring all the raw materials from the bottom to the top. You have to bring all the wood for the kilns from around to the top. That's a hard work. All other kilns that we know from Galilee and other sites are located in the valleys or near the valleys, not on the hill. For me, it tells me that the people of Yodfat, as they have had a very strong shortage of arable lands, had to be entrepreneurs and to solve their economical problems. And even if it is hard work, they produced vessels in their town. And we have 4 kilns on the site. This is the largest kiln. These are the evidence from the excavations. And this is a waster that tells us that these vessels were produced on site. And at the upper part of a potter's wheel. It's made of stone, of course. This is our reconstruction of this type of kilns after making the vessels. After they were dried in the sun, they are brought into the kiln and being fired. We discovered 4 kilns at Yodfat. Move to dwellings. Dwellings also represent the lifestyle of people. So we can see here the dwellings on the moderate southern slope. This is again the top, the summit. This is the moderate slope, and this is the plateau to the south, which we've seen the house of the oil producers. Here on the moderate slope, the houses were built in terraces. Of course, this is our dig. It's not one house. This is probably one house, and this is another house. But we can see here that they're built according to the moderate slope. Every house or every room is 0.5 meter higher than the other one. When we move to the eastern, very sharp slopes, you can see that the steps here, the terraces are very, very tall. And we have here a house that has probably had 2 or 3 stories high. And the terrace walls are very, very wide and strong, because you cannot build on a steep slope if you don't have strong supporting walls that will allow the houses to be built on top. That, of course, should bring a lot of investment and a lot of money in building these terraces before you start building the walls, the houses on top of them. And that's brought us to this unusual discovery. Believe me, huge surprise. Colleagues from all over the country came to see it. We have here a house which is frescoed. Not only the walls, but the floor is frescoed. It was not excavated because we wanted to maintain it, but we checked, and it was frescoed, so people were going barefoot in the house. These frescoes are well known in Israel. Where? In the palaces of King Herod, Masada, Herodium, in the rich houses of Jerusalem, in the rich houses of Caesarea Maritima. Here, in a neglected village in the Galilee? Yes, and that was the great surprise. Not only the state of preservation, which is great. Look at the bright colors, even nicer than those of Masada. They were taken out, and they are now displayed in the Hecht Museum in Haifa. There are other luxurious objects that we have from the dig, and that's again, I want to show you the objects and tell you what it tells me. Okay? Here is a door key. This is about this size. Iron. You don't send your kid with the door key on his neck to school. Okay? Otherwise, he will have some medical problems. But if you have someone that can pay for a locksmith to make a lock on his door with a key, there's something that he wants to guard in his house. If you are a poor person, you don't have to lock your door. Therefore, it tells me that there were not only the frescoed house, but there were other houses of a higher social rank. The same goes for this little bone box, or the bone lid of a box. This is 5 centimeters, so it's 3 centimeters in diameter, made on a lathe. It's an expensive object. What do you keep in a box of 3 centimeters in diameter? I know what they keep what they keep inside today. They keep heroin, but there was no heroin at this time, so it was probably very, very rich perfumes or powders, or it's not even jewelry because it's too small to take jewels. And there are rings, bronze ring and a gold ring, and a gem decorated with a palm leaf. But what is more important is this part. You can see it is 5 centimeters in diameter, and there are 4 holes in each one of these plates. This is a measuring scale, 5 centimeters in diameter. What you scale? Potatoes? No, it's for precious objects. So if there's someone at Yodfat who sells precious objects, there's someone who buys them. Altogether, this group of artifacts, together with the fresco house, tell us that it's not only a very poor village. And that, of course, will have its implication towards the end of the lecture. Issue of oil lamps. We have 2 types of oil lamps at Yodfat. The first one is this one. We call it knife-pared or Herodian oil lamps for those who are more familiar with Israeli archaeology. It is made on a pottery wheel. This is made on a pottery wheel, and the nozzle was adjusted to it. This is a single light, single wick oil lamp, and here we have a multi-nozzle oil lamp, a ring with nozzles around it. We checked the material. These types of oil lamps, both of them, and many others from Yodfat were checked, were made in Jerusalem. This is a Galilean type, which was produced probably at Yodfat by the potters. But what is amazing is that more than 60% of the oil lamps found at Yodfat are imported from Jerusalem. They knew how to make their own oil lamps, but they brought oil lamps from Jerusalem. All their cooking pots, all their jars were locally made. Only oil lamps were brought from Jerusalem. I tried to find some hints in the Mishnah and the Talmud, couldn't find anything. And therefore I have my own suggestion that it has to do with the light, the holiness of Jerusalem, the temple, the menorah in the temple. A light in the house, whether it is Shabbat or not Shabbat. The light in the house is connected to the holiness of Jerusalem, and therefore, if it's lit in an oil lamp that was brought from Jerusalem, it is even more sacred, more important to the family. Stone vessels. We all do know today very well that this type of vessels that were cut from chalk, a soft limestone, was cut from with a lathe inside, and by knife outside. You can see the marks were used in the Second Temple period until the second century, first century BC to second century CE, and it was in the purpose to keep to keep cleanness, okay, ritual cleanness. It means that we know that according to the Torah, there are 3 types of vessels that cannot get impurity. That's the word I was missing. Cannot get impurity. Stone vessels, mud vessels, not clay, mud, meaning dry sun, sun-dry, and dung vessels. Surprising, yes. Dung vessels cannot get impurity. For our world, when we wash hands every 3 minutes, it looks a little bit odd, but for the ancient world it was important. In any case, this mud and dung don't stay in the ground, but stone vessels can preserve themselves very well, as you can see. So we do know today that this is type of vessels that were used by Jews in the Second Temple period for purification. And here we have nothing about it in Josephus, for example, but we have it in the New Testament. The wedding at Cana, when Jesus came to the wedding and the wine was over and the family asked him to make some kind of a miracle and to solve the problem, he asked them, do you have water? And the answer is, there are 5 jars of stone with water for purification. And then he changed them to wine. Okay? But stone jars for purification. That's an important hint from a first century book. And if we put all the coin together, you can see that a very large amount of the coins are Hasmonean. And that's a very interesting issue, because we found Hasmonean coins on the floors of the first century CE. About a century after the Hasmonean family disappeared. We have the Herodians after them. It means the Jews in the Galilee continued to use old coins because they are Hasmoneans, because they are Jewish, because they are carrying Hebrew script on them as inner circulation. Both sides of the first century, which was largely excavated, and Gamla in the Golan and Yodfat in the Galilee, brought to light thousands of Hasmonean coins on the floors of the first century CE until the destruction of these two sites. Again, it tells us about Jewish life, about Jewish feelings toward Jewishness. They couldn't use these coins when they were going to the pagan cities around. They had also other coins. They had Tyrian coins, they had Roman coins. They used them, of course, but they kept the old Jewish coins with them. And what about synagogues? Today we know very well that the synagogue existed at the time of the Second Temple. It is very clear. We have evidence. We know it from literary sources and we know it from archaeology. There is no doubt about it. 3 buildings were identified as synagogue are known to date in the north: Gamla, Magdala, and recently a small rural one at Tel Rechesh, which I'm going to show you very briefly, just to tell you that for 7 seasons I was looking for the synagogues and I didn't find it. Shmaryahu Gutman, the excavator of Gamla, found the synagogue in the first season. So there are some good archaeologists and some bad archaeologists. Here are the 3. Gamla synagogue, dated very well into the first century CE, the largest of these synagogues in Israel. Magdala, the new one, beautiful synagogue, and the small one that was just discovered last summer in my excavations on Tel Rechesh, which is a small rural farmstead synagogue. I want to compare the life of a village like Yodfat with the city nearby. Sepphoris is just about the capital of Galilee. It's just about 6 miles south of Yodfat. But the life is completely different. What we see here is a plan of a Roman-type city. There is the main north-south road, the Cardo, and the Komanos west-east, public structures, theater. Okay, here is the theater at Sepphoris, built at the first century CE, probably by Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, the ruler of the Galilee. And beside it is the public structure, probably the forum, and I take the opportunity to dedicate this slide to the blessed memory of Professor Jim Strange, who passed away last month, a great man, a great archaeologist, and a great friend. The other capital of Galilee is Tiberias. The oldest one is Sepphoris, but when Herod Antipas got the kingdom, he started at Sepphoris, and immediately he wanted to build himself a new capital, and he chose the western shore of the Sea of Galilee and built Tiberias. This year, 2018, we celebrate 2,000 years for Tiberias. all the way along, since 18, when it was established by Herod Antipas, all these years, the city existed under different rulers, of course. So we have here the same story. We have the gate, a freestanding gate without a wall, a ceremonial gate, the southern gate, the Jerusalem gate of Tiberias, built in the 1st century. We have a beautiful theater that was exposed in the last 8 years. So you can easily compare between life in the rural area and life in the cities. And that's, of course, an important issue to comparison, because scholars who are trying to understand the 1st century, and especially the time of Jesus, suggested that Jesus went only to the villages because poor people lived in the villages. He did not go to Tiberias or Sepphoris, not mentioned in the New Testament, because there were rich people there. At the end, we'll see how we suggested to solve this issue. So now we move to Yodfat at war. We've seen its life. Now we see it in a war. You all know, I assume, that Yosef ben Matityahu, Joseph, son of Matthias, a young person of about 30 years old, was appointed by the government in Jerusalem, the war government in Jerusalem, in 66 to be the ruler of the Galilee, the commander of the Galilee, the general of the Galilee, whatever you like to call it. I call him the governor of Galilee, together with 7 other people who were appointed in other parts of the Jewish country. This is the beginning of the revolt. No more Roman governors. We are governing our own country. That is a revolt. So Josephus was sent to the north. He had never been there. He doesn't know the people. And he started to adjust himself to the new life here. As you all know, he found himself at the very end of the siege of Yodfat, and that's why Yodfat is so important. This is the place in which Josephus fell into Roman hands. This is the place of the beginning of a historian who wrote the story of the 1st century at the end of the Second Temple period. That's why it is so important, and scholars and researchers all over the world, from Japan to Brazil, are interested in what we are doing in the Galilee, especially at Yodfat, because this is the place where Josephus fought. So according to him, when he appointed to be the governor of Galilee, he came and he started fortifying 19 settlements in the Galilean Golan, which was the area he controlled. And he prepared them for a war by building walls and collecting war materials and food and water to prepare himself for the war. The war came very quickly. The emperor in Rome at this time was Nero. He was very angry. He lost in 66. He lost a legion near Jerusalem at the Bet Horon Ascent, attacked by the zealots. So he sends one of his best retired generals, Vespasian, who was 60 at these years. He came with his son Titus and 4 legions with other auxiliary, altogether 60,000 Roman soldiers gathered at Acop Ptolemais, the Galilean shore, and first of all took Sepphoris without a war. Sepphoris surrendered to the Romans, surrounded the mountains, and put the first siege of this war around Yodfat. The war is in the summer of 67. One of our goals was trying to identify and date the walls of which some were seen on surface. Dating a wall is a problem because usually we date with pottery. If we are lucky, we have some coins. But if you want to date a wall to 66, it is very hard. If we will find that the wall was built in 50, it was not built for the war, because in 50 no one knew that there would be a war. So we were trying to be very precise and try to find evidence, but all the areas that we excavated here in the northern fortification yielded no clear evidence for a 66 wall. The best thing, of course, is to find a small hoard of coins that all of them will be 66. We didn't. Even better is to find an inscription saying, me, Josephus Flavius, I built the wall against the Romans in 66. We didn't find it. And he was not called Josephus Flavius yet. It was still Yosef ben Matityahu. In any case, you can see here the different layers of the fortifications in the north, the most accessible side. We have here the Hellenistic remains of the village. We have here in blue the Hasmonean wall, and we have here in yellow the walls that were built in the early Roman period. I can't say 66, but I can say early Roman period, and that's important. Early Roman could be 50 as well, but we proved in other places that it is from 66. In one place, one of the casement wall is a wall built of rooms. Okay, there is a front wall and a back wall and rooms inside, like those of Masada, if you had the opportunity to visit there. One of the casements, one of the rooms, was filled with stones. When we dug it to find any evidence, we discovered that in between the stones there is a ballista ball, a stone ball that was shot from a Roman machine. So this fill was put when there were ballistas shooting at the town. It proved to us that at least this fill was made during a war, and that's important discovery. We discovered the place where the Hasmonean wall that goes around the summit meets a Roman period wall. It was dated to the Roman period, again, not 66, but Roman. So we have here another project that joined the earlier walls and surrounded the entire town. Under one of the casements in the lower part, in the southwestern wall, we discovered a hiding shelter, underground hiding shelter. You enter it from the room. This is the room. The floor, of course, was up here. You go down the floor into a shaft, and from the shaft there is a tunnel cut into the rock. You can see the tunnel here. There's another shaft. There's a place to walk over here, but there's another shaft going down another floor into two more cavities. And we found there pottery of the 1st century CE and a small hoard of coins. There were a few others, but there were 6 silver coins dated to 64. It means that very short after, until they arrived here, the coins, someone took his money into this shelter in a hope that things will be better. He can go out with his money and start new life. The fact that the money is there and he is not tells us what happened. But the most important discovery of the dating of the fortification was found on the eastern side. And here the wall, you can clearly see it, was built by cutting the pottery kiln. There was a potter here working. The builders of the wall came and said, you cannot continue working here because this is exactly the line of the wall that we want to build. The Romans are on the way. Evacuate. And he said, of course, no, for war, God helps and we will win the war, there's no problem. So the wall was built by cutting this installation. And for us, of course, as archaeologists, it's a treasure. If I will identify what kind of pots he was doing in this kiln, and I'll find them also in the destroyed houses, it means that it's all happened in a small capsule of time. He was producing vessels that he sold to the people in the town until 67, but until 67, a wall came and destroyed his kiln. So it's a small capsule of time, and that's what happened. That's what we discovered. He was producing the same jars that were found on the floors of the destroyed houses. That's an example of how archaeology can tell us, can bring us into a very short periods of time if we are lucky. No synagogue, by the dating of the wall. Okay, the Roman army arrived and they camped in front of the town of the wall, and I assume, I didn't speak yet to Vespasian, someday I will, but then I'll not be able to write articles. So I assume that when he stood as a general who was in the army from the age of 16, looking at the poor walls of Yodfat, he says to his soldiers, that's a piece of cake. That's a British accent because he was the commander of all the armies in Britain before that. Okay, what we have in archaeology? Out of Josephus' story, detailed story. Josephus' story of Yodfat is the most detailed story after Jerusalem, more than Masada. So we have his story, but you know, he's an historian, he's a writer, he has his own agendas. For me, archaeology talks stronger. So we have, on the northern slope, we found a layer of cement and stones, and below it, a lot of soil in layers. In one of the areas that we dug into this mortar, we found arrowheads stuck in the mortar. It means that the mortar was poured here during a war. And because Josephus is describing a Roman assault ramp, we suggest that we discovered the ramp. Not only this, but this area that I signed here was marked over here. You can see little walls here, the black lines. Nowhere else we have them all around, only here. And this is exactly where the layers of cement and soil are. These are supporting walls for the ramp. And therefore I'd suggest that a Roman ramp led in front of the wall, as Josephus described it, pushing up the battering ram to destroy the walls. Some of you who visited Masada know very well the ramp at Masada. That's desert with 30 millimeters rainfall in a year. Here we are in the Galilee, 600 millimeters rainfall a year. Therefore, we don't have the ramp. Only these remains that we suggest the ramp, and this is how Campbell, a scholar of the Roman army, suggests to see this ramp, according to the evidence I brought to him. And this is the warfare. Okay, what we have here is a catapult arrowhead. It's a heavy weapon that was shot from a machine for a distance of about 900 feet. If it meets someone, even if you have a shield on you, meets someone in 300 meters, it goes through. These are bow arrowheads, both Roman and Jews. These were only in Roman hands. These are ballista balls shot from the Roman machines. And these are tiny nails of the caliga of the Roman army shoe. Tells us that there were Roman soldiers here, archaeologically. We know, according to Josephus, that there were not one, not two, but 60,000. The range of the machines is about 300 meters or 900 feet. So I made some circles here to show you that Yodfat could be shot from all around, all over the town, and that's exactly what Josephus is telling us, and that's exactly what we found. We found ballista balls all over the town. We didn't have money to put 60,000 of these, so we put 40. That's the beginning. We were trying to show the Roman army and the new development of the site, but that's a reflection of what was here in 67. After 47 days of bloody siege, heavy descriptions, bloody description of Josephus, the town fell into Roman hands. And Josephus described heavy massacre of men, women, and children. At this point, historians, through the research from the end of the 19th century until today, suggested Josephus is bluffing as usual, and there was nothing. A modern scholar last year suggested in a new book, one of the top scholars of Josephus suggested that the Roman march in the Galilee was nothing else but like a small police. Our results are completely different. The Yodfat excavations discovered human bones everywhere. Every house we excavated, we found human bones. But the large collection was found in cisterns. Here you have one example, here we have another example, and here is leg bones of a man in the frescoed room. Some of the bones were carrying cut marks, which means massacre. Men, women, and children. These heaps of bones in the cisterns were not complete bodies. They were not thrown down there by the Romans. These people were left in the streets to be eaten by birds of prey and wild animals. It took a year or 2 or 3 until Jews came back to the destroyed town, gathered the bones, and as they have no way to identify the people, they put them in mass graves in the cisterns, and they never came back to settle the place. One of the most, or maybe the most, touching finds, I can even say in my whole career, is this stone, about 4 inches to each side, very flat field stone, is etched, as you can see. On one side is a mausoleum. This is a depiction of a mausoleum. Here is another mausoleum on a Jewish burial ossuary from Jerusalem. Here is a very similar mausoleum in the Kidron Valley in Jerusalem, cut of stone from the same period, late 1st century BC, beginning of 1st century CE. You can see the similarities, a square structure with a pyramid on top, standing on 3 steps, square structure, pyramid on top. This is a mausoleum. A mausoleum is a symbol of death in the Roman world. Like today, skull with crossbones. You want to depict, as kids say today, the emojis, of death is a mausoleum. And on the other side is a crab, cancer. Here is an example of a cancer from a later period mosaic floor of a synagogue in the Jericho area. We can see the similarities. So what a crab is doing here, my analysis of this stone is that someone in the dying town of Yodfat, just a few weeks before it fell into Roman hands, suffering from hunger, thirst, and death from the falling stones and arrows, takes a stone and etch it, expressing his feelings. We are going to die in July. The crab is the zodiac symbol of July, or the Hebrew Tammuz. According to Josephus, the town fell on the 1st of Tammuz, the 20th of July. He never forgot this moment. Believe me, he never forgot this moment. So we have here a very unusual find, a find that reflects human feelings. It's so rare in archaeology. We have coins, walls, pottery. They don't express feelings. Here we have a very rare example of a Jew from the besieged town of Yodfat. This was another touching moment, even for a secular Jew like myself. After finding the bones, we were in touch with the chief rabbinate of the Israeli army. These were not soldiers, but they were fighters, civilians who were fighting for freedom. I assume you know, those of you who are interested in history, that the First Jewish Revolt was not a religious war. It was a war for political freedom, which is of course connected to belief, but it was for freedom. They died. Therefore, we involved the chief rabbinate of the Israeli army. They came and they took the bones of this man from the fresco room and buried together with the other bones in the cistern. And that's the memorial we put after we finished the excavations. I promised you what is the importance of the fresco. The fresco tells us that in this neglected town, small town or large village in the mountains of Galilee, there were very rich people as well as simple people. So I tried to collect the evidence that we were talking about, including the bones, so what the bones has to do with it. The bones were checked by our anthropologist, and he told us, as I always like to say in a cynical way, they all died healthy. There is nothing about poverty here. No malnutrition. According to the bones, they all lived healthy life. And that, of course, tells us about the regular life in Galilean villages. And that's, of course, very important evidence to build the social hierarchy of Galileans in the first century, especially for the study of historical Jesus. So at the bottom, there are probably the spinners, weavers, and potters. Above them, there are the people who are producing. They have these little factories, workshops of olive oil and flour mills. And on top is the people who are living in these magnificent buildings. They're all living in the same town. So you cannot say that Jesus was preaching to the poor people of Galilee because all villagers were peasants. Okay, peasant is the wrong word to use here. There were farmers, they were producing, they had workshops. Some of them were poor, some of them were middle classes, and some of them were very, very wealthy. That's the real story of Galilee. Few 150 years later, the Jews came back. They didn't settle the same hill because they all knew it's a big cemetery. So they settled here on the other side, and we have here evidence for a Jewish synagogue of the 3rd, 4th century CE. And there's a modern settlement at Yodfat. In the late 50s, a new moshav, a new settlement was settled just beside ancient Yodfat and was named Yodfat. We are busy now in developing the site for the public with a lot of investment from the Israeli government. As you can see, the guy from Iran is here. This guy is not from the Mossad, so don't ask me questions about this. But we are developing the site, and it's going to be a very interesting site. For those of you who are coming next year to Israel, don't forget to visit us. Thank you very much.